He lost his leg. He may never walk again. And still she hasn't called. Not a message. Not a whisper. Not even a forwarded email through a publicist. Thomas Markle Sr., the man who once cradled a newborn Meghan in his arms, who worked night shifts to pay for her education, who proudly told his friends she'd be royalty one day, just had his leg amputated. A devastating, life-altering surgery. His body is broken. His spirit, hanging on by a thread. And through it all, there's been one piercing silence louder than any scream. His daughter Meghan. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What kind of daughter vanishes when her father is in the hospital facing death? What kind of global advocate for compassion, mental health, and kindness ignores her own flesh and blood in his darkest hour? And here's the twist. This isn't just some family feud. This isn't a tabloid spat between long-lost relatives. No, this is something deeper, more brutal, more telling. Because just 3 minutes ago, yes, literally minutes before this very recording, Thomas Jr., Meghan's half-brother, stepped forward and dropped a bombshell. One that reframes the entire narrative. One that might just shatter the public image Meghan has spent years carefully crafting. One that left us stunned. If you thought this was just another sad story about an estranged father and daughter, think again. This is about what happens when fame collides with family. When the cameras go off, and all that's left behind is a hospital bed, a missing limb, and a phone that never rings. So let's go back. Let's unravel it all, step by step, beat by beat. Because once we show you what's really been happening behind the palace gates and Netflix premieres, when no one's watching, when the charity speeches fade into the background, what's left is a heartbreak so raw, so bitter, and so utterly human, it may just leave you asking, was this all part of a plan? Or did something inside Meghan Markle truly break? The first thing you need to know is this. Thomas Markle is not just Meghan's father. He was her provider, her biggest cheerleader, and, for years, the only person who believed in her dream enough to sacrifice his own future for it. He's also now 81 years old. And last week, in a cramped, underfunded hospital in the Philippines, far from the manicured lawns of Montecito or the gleaming corridors of royal palaces, he was told he might die. His leg had turned blue, then black. Within hours, it was a case of life or death. The doctors didn't mince words. Amputate now, or it's over. His son, Thomas Jr., spoke to reporters shortly after the emergency surgery, and his words were raw, trembling, and brutally honest. "My dad is being very brave," he said. "This happened so quickly. I took him to a local hospital. They did scans and ultrasound. Said the leg had to go. There was no option. Let that sink in for a second. This man, a father, a grandfather, a human being, was driven to the brink. And through it all, what did he ask? Not for money, not for fanfare. Just one thing. Has Meghan called? He whispered it, according to Thomas Jr., groggy from painkillers, confused, bleeding, broken, still hoping. Still holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, his daughter would reach out. But she didn't. Not before the surgery. Not after. And as we sit here now, telling you this story, the silence from Meghan's camp remains deafening. You know what's haunting? Meghan Markle is one of the most famous women in the world. She has a direct line to Oprah. She can call the White House if she wants to. She was recently spotted on lavish holidays, working on brand deals, filming content, making global speeches about the importance of family and healing. Yet when her own father's leg was amputated, nothing. Not even a single flower sent to the hospital bed. And you have to ask yourself, why? Is it shame? Is it strategy? Is there a legal reason? A PR calculation? Or is it something colder, something far more personal? Because the real question isn't just, why hasn't Meghan called? It's, why does she still refuse to let him meet his grandchildren? Archie Harrison, Lilibet Diana, 2 beautiful children, royal blood, American citizens, famous before they could walk. And yet, their maternal grandfather, Thomas Markle, has never even seen them. Not once. Not on a Zoom call. Not a photo. Not a birthday party invite. He's watched them grow through paparazzi lenses and tabloid covers. He's listened to Meghan praise her kids in interviews, talk about their laughter, their little quirks. But he's never heard them say Grandpa. Let that land for a moment. Thomas Markle may die never having met his grandchildren. And it's not because he's estranged. It's not because he's dangerous. It's not because he's unfit. It's because Meghan said no. And now that he's lost a leg and faces a slow, painful recovery, it may be too late. But here's where it all takes a turn. Because Thomas Jr., the half-brother Meghan never speaks about, the man she's tried to erase from the public narrative, just made a stunning claim. He says this silence isn't an accident. It's a decision. A cold, deliberate choice. Not just to protect herself, but to punish her father. Punish him for speaking out. Punish him for posing for paparazzi before her wedding. Punish him for breaking her carefully constructed fairy tale. Thomas Jr. claims Meghan has weaponized her fame, her legal team, and her platform. Not just to protect her privacy, but to silence her past, to rewrite history. And Thomas Sr.? He's collateral damage. If that's true, if this silence is intentional, strategic, it reframes everything. The Netflix docuseries, the Oprah interview, the carefully manicured image of a woman wronged by the world, the Duchess cast aside by a cruel, outdated monarchy, the mother fighting to protect her family. What if the real story is a little messy, eh? What if, behind the camera-ready smiles and viral speeches, there's a daughter willing to watch her father suffer and say nothing? What if the compassion we see on stage doesn't stretch beyond the velvet curtain? We'll dig deeper into that. We'll examine the letter Meghan wrote to her father after the wedding. We'll expose the contradictions between her public persona and private choices. We'll take you inside the hospital room in Cebu where Thomas Markle lies, one leg gone, still waiting for a call that may never come. And we'll ask the questions no one else dares to ask. Is Meghan truly a victim? Or has she become the villain in her own family's story? Is this estrangement the result of trauma or strategy? And most chilling of all, does she even care anymore? Because what Thomas Jr. just revealed, what we'll break down in the next chapter, might finally answer that. He says Meghan made a calculated choice years ago, and it all started before the wedding, before the tiaras, before the Netflix deals, before the world believed in her fairy tale. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It didn't creep in slowly. There were no early warnings, no gentle symptoms, no time to prepare. 1 minute, Thomas Markle was living his quiet, post-spotlight life in the Philippines. The next, his leg turned blue, then black, and then they told him they had no choice. They had to take it, amputate, or die. Now imagine hearing that at 81 years old, alone, hospitalized, forgotten by your daughter, the same daughter who once called you her rock. Let that sit with you. What do you think was going through his mind as he stared down the very real possibility that he'd lose his leg or his life? Was he thinking about the pain, the surgery, the wheelchair he'd be confined to? Or was he still thinking about her? Still wondering why Meghan hadn't picked up the phone? Still waiting for that single act of mercy, a text, a call, even a cold "hope you're okay." But none of it came, because as the nurses rolled him toward the operating room, sedatives kicking in, his blood pressure rising, his world narrowing to a tunnel of fluorescent lights and beeping machines, all Thomas Sr. could whisper was, "Has Meghan called yet?" Now, let's rewind a bit. We need to understand how it came to this. How a man once photographed beaming with pride at his daughter's success ended up in a hospital bed 7,000 miles away, legless, voiceless, and cut off from his family. Because this wasn't just a freak medical accident. It was a buildup, a slow decay of health, loneliness, and neglect. And it started with a blood clot. A tiny clot, lodged deep in the vessels of his lower leg. The kind of clot that, if caught early, could have been treated, managed, monitored. But Thomas Sr. wasn't in a Beverly Hills hospital. He wasn't being examined weekly by a private physician. He was in Cebu, a tropical island paradise, if you're a tourist. A medical gamble if you're an 81-year-old man on a fixed income. So when that clot began to grow, slowly choking off the blood supply, no one noticed. Not at first. It wasn't until Thomas Jr. visited and saw the discoloration, the blue tint spreading across his father's toes, that the alarm bells rang. Thomas Jr. described the scene like something out of a nightmare. My dad's foot looked wrong. It was swelling, darkening. I knew something was off, he told Mail Online. I rushed him to the local hospital. They did an ultrasound, a scan, and the doctors didn't hesitate. They told us flat out, if we don't amputate, he's not making it through the night. And just like that, a father's life changed. in a foreign country, in a hospital where few even knew who he was, with only one of his children by his side, and it wasn't Meghan. Now let's be brutally honest for a second. This isn't just about a man losing his leg. This is about the heartbreak of losing something far worse: hope. Because even then, even as his foot darkened and pain shot through his body, even as the surgical team prepped for a 3-hour emergency procedure, Thomas Markle still believed there was time for her to come around. He still believed his daughter might call. Why? Because that's what parents do. They hope. They forgive. Even when the world tells them not to. Even when the world reminds them of the betrayal, the silence, the disownment. Parents always hold out. They make excuses for their children. She's busy. She's under pressure. She's got the kids. Maybe her phone's off. But when Thomas Jr. had to look his father in the eye and say, "No, Dad, she hasn't called," something in that hospital room broke. Not just the silence. Not just the man. But the illusion. The illusion that fame, success, and royalty could be compatible with the raw, unfiltered love of family. Now, let's talk about the amputation itself. Because this wasn't minor surgery. This wasn't a toe or a patch of skin. It was a full lower leg removal. We're talking about severing the limb just below the knee, cutting through muscle, tendons, nerves, reshaping the remaining tissue so it could support a prosthetic someday. Blood loss, risk of infection, trauma to the heart, the mind, the soul. And through it all, Thomas Markle remained calm, stoic, brave. That's what Thomas Jr. says. My dad, he was braver than I could have been. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He just kept asking if Meghan knew. And when they wheeled him out of surgery, wrapped in bandages, pale from blood loss, dizzy with medication, what was the first thing he said? Did she call while I was under? No, she didn't. And to this day, she still hasn't. Let's pause for a second and ask the uncomfortable question. How did we get here? How did a man once hailed as a proud, loving father, a man who paid for Meghan's education, supported her Hollywood dreams, and cried when she became royalty, end up discarded like this? And more importantly, why hasn't Meghan said anything? She's spoken about everything else. Race, royal pain, paparazzi trauma, mental health, her marriage, her miscarriages, her motherhood. But when it comes to her father losing a leg, silence, not a single word. Now some of you might say, maybe she didn't know. But let's be real. The world knew. Major UK outlets published it. Headlines splashed across timelines and YouTube videos. Thomas Markle amputated. Life or death. Meghan silent. Even her own brother gave interviews. This wasn't buried news. This wasn't a secret. This was a global headline. And Meghan? She has a team of media professionals, PR advisors, social media monitors, assistants who scan the internet hourly for mentions of her name. So let's ask again. If she knew and still didn't call, what does that say? What does that say about compassion? About values? About integrity? Because Meghan Markle has built an empire on the back of empathy, on the promise of emotional intelligence, on the idea that kindness is power. So where was that kindness when her father lay bleeding, limbless, and begging for connection? Where was the voice for the voiceless when her own father had lost the ability to walk? Where was the Duchess of Healing when healing was needed most? Thomas Jr. doesn't mince words. There was no option, he said. We had to amputate. It was life or death. And through it all, Meghan stayed silent. But it's not just the silence that hurts. It's the echo, the void, the sense that even if he had died on that table, she still wouldn't have come. And that thought, that crushing realization, it's what haunts Thomas Sr. even more than the missing limb. Because deep down, in the part of his heart that still beats for his little girl, Thomas Markle still asks himself, what did I do that was so unforgivable? And that's where we leave you, for now. Because if you thought the surgery was the worst part of this story, if you thought the physical amputation was the climax, think again. Because Thomas Jr. just revealed something else. A hidden moment before Meghan's royal wedding. A conversation that, if true, may reveal exactly why she's never forgiven their father. And it's not what you think. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the silence is the message? Let's go straight to the heart of it. Thomas Markle, leg amputated, near death, publicly humiliated, still hasn't received a single call, letter, or visit from Meghan Markle. Not a voice note. Not a Zoom call. Not a get-well-soon card. Not a photo of her children. Nothing. And that's not just a tragic omission. It's a calculated decision. A daughter who travels the world speaking on emotional healing and mental health. Who launched a podcast exploring the labels placed on women. Who told Oprah, with tears in her eyes, how devastating it was to feel silenced and alone, has now gone silent herself. To her own father, while he lies in a wheelchair, legless, elderly, and alone. The question is no longer, why hasn't Meghan reached out? The question is, what does she gain by not doing so? Here's where it gets disturbing. This isn't the first time Thomas Markle has begged for contact. This is a man who, over the last 5 years, has made dozens of public pleas. He's gone on record over and over again, not to insult or belittle his daughter, but to say one thing. I love her. I miss her. I want to see my grandchildren. That's it. And every time he says it, the world holds its breath. Will she answer? Will this be the moment? Will Meghan finally come around? But every time, nothing. The last verifiable communication between Meghan Markle and her father took place more than 5 years ago, in the days leading up to her royal wedding. She sent him a letter, one that would later be leaked, dissected, and weaponized in a lawsuit that made international headlines. But since then, not a word. Not when he had a stroke in 2022. Not when he was rushed to the hospital in Rosarito. Not when he nearly died. Not now. Not even after his leg was amputated. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the current state of their relationship, nothing will. And yet, somehow, it gets worse. Let's look at the timeline. Thomas Jr. has now confirmed his father's surgery happened just days ago. Emergency. No warning. Doctors said he could lose his life if they didn't act quickly. This wasn't elective. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something you recover from with rest and vitamins. They had to remove the leg. And Thomas Jr., who accompanied his father to the hospital, made sure the media knew. He issued direct statements. Multiple UK outlets covered it. Social media erupted. Headlines everywhere screamed. Thomas Markle has leg amputated as Meghan remains silent. The message was unmistakable. This man could have died, and his daughter still hasn't called. And here's the emotional spike. Thomas Jr. says the very first thing his father asked, upon waking from the anesthesia, groggy and barely coherent, was, "Has Meghan reached out yet?" Not, "How's my leg?" Not, "What did the doctors say?" Not, "Am I going to be okay?" No, his mind went straight to her. She didn't come. And for many, that silence spoke louder than 1,000 interviews. Here's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Meghan Markle has built her public brand, her legacy, on family values, healing from trauma, and redefining the broken traditions of royalty. She's spoken candidly about the pain of estrangement. She's described in vivid detail how she felt unsupported, unloved, cast aside. But now that the shoe is on the other foot, now that her father is the one lying in bed, hurting, abandoned, she vanishes. Where's the compassion? Where's the empathy? Where's the woman who told Oprah, "I just wanted someone to say, 'Are you okay?'" Because that's all Thomas Sr. wanted too. He didn't ask for money, or forgiveness, or a public reconciliation. Just a call. A single call. And it never came. But let's push this further. Because even if we say, for argument's sake, that Meghan has been hurt, that the relationship is beyond repair, does that justify keeping her own children from their grandfather? 2 children, Archie and Lilibet. The grandchildren Thomas Sr. has never met. Not once. No visits. No introductions. Not even a single photograph sent privately. And that choice is entirely Meghan's. Let's break that down for a second. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor and Lilibet Diana. Names that echo the very history of the British monarchy, are growing up with no contact whatsoever with their maternal grandfather. They live in California. He lives in Mexico. That's not the moon. It's a 3-hour flight. Less than $100 for a first-class stamp and a printed photo. But still, nothing. Can you imagine? Growing up knowing you have a grandfather who longs to see you, who bought toys for you, who saved pictures, who cried on camera when you were born, and being told, "No, you'll never meet him. Not because he's dangerous, not because he's unfit, but because your mother said so." And let's not forget what Meghan told the world. She said the royal family robbed her of her identity. She said she was silenced. She said she wanted her children to know where they came from. So why then, Has she erased half of their history? Thomas Markle isn't some mystery man with a checkered past. He was an Emmy-winning lighting director in Hollywood. He worked on Married with Children, General Hospital, Deal or No Deal. He helped fund Meghan's private education, paid for her acting lessons, supported her dream of fame. And now? Now he's a man with one leg, crying silently into hospital sheets, waiting for a call that never comes. Here's where the emotional weight hits hardest. Thomas Markle Sr. kept photos of Meghan all over his home in Rosarito. Framed pictures, scrapbooks, news clippings, even after all the drama. Even after the wedding fallout. Even after the letter, the lawsuits, the silence. He still had hope. He believed that maybe, one day, Meghan would call. That maybe Archie and Lilibet would come visit. That maybe he could hold them, read to them, leave them something of himself. But as each day passes, as his health deteriorates, that dream grows dimmer. And now, after the amputation, it may be gone for good. So what happens next? What happens when a man like Thomas Markle wakes up one morning and realizes, this is it, that his daughter, the little girl he once carried on his shoulders, is never coming back? That she's chosen silence, deliberately, repeatedly, that she's building a new life, a new image, a new empire, and he's not part of the blueprint. Does he try again? Does he write another letter? Or does he finally give up? And if he does, what does that make Meghan? A protector? Or a punisher? A survivor? Or an executioner of emotional ties? Because here's the part no one wants to say out loud. When Meghan Markle talks about setting boundaries, when she gives interviews about cutting out toxicity, when she speaks about protecting her peace, she's not just talking about tabloids or royals. She's talking about her own family. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe, in her mind, Thomas Markle has already been amputated, emotionally, long before the leg ever was. Maybe, to her, that call never came, because it was never going to. But before you make up your mind, before you decide whether to defend Meghan or condemn her, wait. Because in the next chapter, we're going to expose a chilling contradiction. Meghan fought hard to ensure Archie and Lilibet were granted their royal titles. She demanded recognition from the institution she claimed abandoned her. She wanted her children to be part of the legacy. But here's the cruel twist. While she fought for them to be prince and princess, she fought just as hard to keep them from ever meeting their grandfather. So what was that about, really? Legacy? Or image control? Because Thomas Jr. says Meghan's fight for titles had nothing to do with heritage and everything to do with leverage. And once you hear why, you'll never look at this family drama the same way again. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What's in a name? Or more specifically, what's in a title? Because in Meghan Markle's world, titles matter. Prince Archie, Princess Lilibet, names that come with centuries of power, legacy, protocol, and prestige. She fought for them, hard, against palace resistance, against protocol, against whispers behind closed royal doors. But here's where the contradiction slices like a knife. While Meghan was publicly demanding that her children be officially recognized as royalty, she was privately ensuring that they'd never even meet their maternal grandfather. Let that contradiction pierce for a moment. Meghan Markle waged a global battle for her kids to carry the same titles as William's children. She wanted parity, fairness, respect, a place in the royal lineage. But not a single moment for Thomas Markle. Not a visit. Not a meeting, not a memory. The kids get the crown, but not the man who helped raise the woman who gave it to them. So, was it really about family? Or was it about power? Let's rewind. After Queen Elizabeth's passing in September 2022, Prince Charles ascended to the throne, and that changed everything. According to royal tradition, grandchildren of the sovereign automatically become princes and princesses. That meant Archie and Lilibet were eligible for royal titles. But for months, no announcement came. No word from the palace. No confirmation. It was a vacuum of silence. And that vacuum, Meghan filled it. Through anonymous sources. Strategic leaks. Carefully worded interviews. Reports emerged that the Sussexes were keen on securing the titles for their children. That they believed it was their birthright. That not granting the titles would be an affront to the children's heritage. Suddenly, the woman who once said, "I don't care about titles," was in a legal and emotional tug-of-war over royal labels. And the public? We were all watching, wondering, Why the change of heart? Why did it matter so much to the woman who supposedly fled the monarchy for freedom? And why now? Here's what's chilling. While that fight for titles raged on, Thomas Markle was recovering from a stroke. He was in Rosarito, isolated, weak, humiliated in the press. His speech was affected, his vision blurred, his health rapidly declining. But not once, did Meghan mention him publicly during the battle for her children's royal status. She mentioned racism, legacy, tradition, justice. But her own father? Silence. Total erasure. And when the titles were finally confirmed, when Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet were officially added to the royal website, what did Thomas Sr. get? Not an update, not a thank you, not a visit. Just another headline reminding him that he still hadn't met his grandchildren. Royal blood, but no royal bond. Now ask yourself, what's the deeper message here? What's more important in Meghan's narrative, emotional reconciliation or symbolic recognition? Because it's easy to talk about healing and trauma on podcasts. It's harder to do it in real life. With your own father. With the man who now sits in a wheelchair, missing a leg, still asking if his daughter will ever call. Let's talk about the money. Because that's where this story takes an even darker turn. Titles come with power, but they also come with leverage. Global branding, book deals, film rights, foundations, charitable initiatives. Princess Lilibet is a brand. Prince Archie is a headline. And in a world where image equals influence, and influence equals income, those titles are golden. Now contrast that with Thomas Markle. No titles, no access, no PR value, no leverage. To include him, visibly, emotionally, publicly, would mean inviting scrutiny into Meghan's backstory, her roots, her real upbringing. And for a woman who has carefully recast herself as a global figure of elegance and progress, the idea of her wheelchair-bound father, speaking emotionally, without filters, may pose a risk, a branding liability. And isn't it strange? The palace, for all its flaws, gave in. They gave Archie and Lilibet their titles. But Meghan never gave her father a moment with his grandkids. So again we ask, was it really about legacy? Or was it about leverage? Now let's bring in Thomas Jr. Because he's not holding back anymore. In his latest statements, Thomas Jr. called out the cold hypocrisy of the situation. He said, and I quote, "How can you fight for your children to be part of a royal family, while completely cutting off the man who raised you? What kind of double standard is that?" It's a brutal accusation, but one many are now echoing. He goes on to say that Meghan's real motive isn't justice, it's reinvention. That the fight for titles was never about healing trauma, but about elevating status, cementing power, controlling the family narrative. And you have to wonder, is he right? Because Meghan has spoken often about rewriting the script of royal history. But in doing so, has she rewritten her own father out of the story entirely? Here's an even darker irony. The only time Thomas Markle appears in public these days is when he's asking to meet his grandchildren. That's it. No scandals, no drama, no tabloid takedowns. Just simple, quiet pleas. Sometimes in interviews, sometimes through his son. And every time, it's the same refrain. I just want to see Archie and Lilibet before I die. That's it. Not to reclaim a throne, not to rewrite history, just to see them. And now, after the leg amputation, that window may be closing. Fast. Because travel is impossible. Health is deteriorating. And hope? It's fading. Soon, there may not be a chance left. And Meghan? Still silent. Let's zoom out. Think about what the world sees. Meghan Markle, global advocate, Netflix star, feminist icon, activist, podcaster, philanthropist, champion of compassion. And then, her father, legless, alone, cut off, no contact, no photos, no stories, not even an attempt. Can you imagine Prince William doing that to Charles? Can you imagine Kate Middleton cutting off her parents? Can you imagine King Charles ignoring a legless parent pleading to meet his grandchildren? Why is Meghan held to a different standard? Or is she? Because more and more people, online, in the press, even inside the royal circle, are starting to ask the same thing. Is this still estrangement? Or is it emotional cruelty? And yet, Thomas Markle still clings to a sliver of hope. Even now, as he undergoes painful rehabilitation, as doctors teach him to move without a limb, as he stares at old photos of his daughter and wonders what went wrong. he still says, "I love her." That's the tragic heart of this story. That even now, he's holding on to the dream that Meghan might forgive him, that she might one day fly down, bring the kids, introduce them, before it's too late. But every day she waits, that door inches closer to shutting forever. In the next chapter, we'll take you back in time, to the letter. The infamous, explosive letter Meghan wrote her father after the wedding. The one she never expected the world to see. We'll break down its tone, its contradictions, and what Thomas Jr. now claims it was really meant to do. Because that letter may be the key to everything. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It was supposed to heal the wound, but instead, it became the knife that cut even deeper. A letter, 5 pages, handwritten, emotional, laced with contradictions. It was meant for one person only, Thomas Markle. But within months, it was in the hands of the press, dissected by lawyers, and weaponized in a privacy war that would stretch all the way to the British courts. And now, years later, that same letter is back in the spotlight. Because Thomas Jr. just revealed there may have been more to it than anyone realized. More pain, more manipulation, more truth, or more lies. This chapter? It might change everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's relationship with her father. Because the letter wasn't just a message. It was a test. And Thomas Sr. failed. Let's start at the beginning. The wedding was over. The tiaras packed away. The vows said. Meghan had married into the most powerful family in the world. But behind the palace doors, chaos simmered. Thomas Markle hadn't attended. In fact, by the time the wedding took place, he was already thousands of miles away, alone, exhausted, recovering from a heart procedure, and watching his daughter marry a prince on a hospital television. He didn't walk her down the aisle. He didn't give a speech. He didn't take a photo with his daughter in her wedding gown. Why? Because, days before the wedding, a media scandal exploded. Thomas Markle had staged paparazzi photos. A series of candid shots of him being measured for a suit, reading books about Britain, preparing for the wedding. All fake. All arranged. He says it was to change the narrative. To look respectable. To show he wasn't the cartoonish, disheveled dad the press had painted. But Meghan and Harry were furious. And the royal machine? Even more so. They told him to stop speaking. To stop appearing. To stop existing publicly. And when he didn't, that's when the fracture became permanent. But Meghan didn't just cut off contact. She wrote a letter. 5 pages. Sent by courier. No email. No phone call. Just ink on paper. She addressed it Daddy. And inside was a storm. The letter wasn't warm. It was cold. Detached. Painfully polite. A forensic dissection of how he had failed her. Not a plea for peace. Not a message of reconciliation. It read like an accusation. "You've broken my heart into a million pieces," she wrote. "Your actions have created so much pain. You've manufactured this fictitious narrative and are being paid for it." The message was clear. You hurt me. You humiliated me. And now I want distance. It wasn't a daughter reaching out to her father. It was a duchess writing a closing argument. And yet, even in that tone, there were cracks. Lines that felt like bait. Holes that suggested something more manipulative. Let's go deeper. Because Thomas Jr. now says that letter was never about healing. He claims Meghan wrote it knowing it would one day be leaked. That it was written with an audience in mind. Not her father, but the media. A carefully worded PR document. Designed to protect her image. To position her as the daughter betrayed. Not the daughter who disappeared. Let that sink in. What if the letter wasn't a peace offering? What if it was a trap? Here's what happened next. Thomas Sr. was devastated. He felt attacked. Rewritten. Misrepresented. But he kept the letter. For months, he didn't share it. Until, finally, he broke. He says he felt vilified by Meghan's allies in the press. He watched as sympathetic columnists praised her silence, blamed him for everything, and cast her as the martyr. He saw his name dragged through the dirt. And he says he had to defend himself. So he gave the letter to the Mail on Sunday. They published excerpts. The backlash? Instant. Meghan sued. She claimed it was a violation of privacy. That the letter was deeply personal, never meant for public consumption. That Thomas Sr. had crossed a line. The courts agreed. After a bitter legal battle, the Mail lost. Meghan won. And the press spun the narrative. The daughter had been wronged. The father had betrayed her trust. Case closed. Or was it? Because years later, Thomas Jr. says something else. He claims Meghan didn't write that letter for her father at all. He says she wrote it to manipulate the legal narrative, to build a paper trail, to make sure she was the one seen as the wounded party. And he claims she deliberately included lines she knew would look good in print if they were ever leaked. Like, "Please stop lying. Please stop exploiting my relationship with my husband." Or, "You've told the press I've shut you out," which is false. Carefully worded, carefully framed, carefully planted. And according to Thomas Jr., that was the plan all along. But here's where the pain gets personal. Because while Meghan was writing legal letters, preparing for lawsuits, and controlling the narrative, Thomas Sr. was just waiting for a phone call. He says he didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to shame her. He just wanted to be heard. And that letter? It wasn't a lifeline. It was a bullet. He says he sat at his kitchen table in Rosarito, reading it over and over again, searching for some warmth, some hint that she still loved him. But it wasn't there. Just blame. Just bitterness. Just goodbye. Imagine that. Imagine receiving a 5-page letter from your daughter, not to say, "I miss you," or "I'm sorry," or "Can we talk?" but to say, "This is all your fault." And then, imagine being sued for sharing it. That's what happened to Thomas Markle. And it broke him. Emotionally, financially, publicly. He became the villain in Meghan's redemption story. And no one cared how it felt. Now here's the twist. Thomas Jr. says there's a second letter. A follow-up. One the public never saw. One that Meghan allegedly sent quietly, after the lawsuit, after the public sympathy. And according to him, this letter was colder, shorter, final. A letter that made it clear the door was shut. Permanently. No more contact. No more forgiveness. No more family. He says that's the moment their father gave up. That's when the pictures came off the wall. That's when the scrapbook was closed. That's when hope turned to despair. And yet, when Thomas Sr. had his leg amputated, he still asked if Meghan had called. Even after all the letters, all the lawsuits, all the erasure, he still believed. That's what makes this story so human and so devastating. Because behind all the titles, lawsuits, and public drama is a man, a father, alone, hurt, still asking if he matters, still hoping his daughter might pick up the phone. But in the next chapter, Thomas Jr. steps forward again. And this time, he's not talking about letters. He's talking about what Meghan said before the wedding. A private moment. A shocking comment. A line that may explain everything. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He was the brother no one wanted to hear from. The Markle the world dismissed. The man left behind in the shadows of Montecito and Buckingham Palace alike. But now, Thomas Markle Jr. is done staying silent. And what he just revealed about Meghan, about her final conversation with her father before the royal wedding, about what she allegedly said behind closed doors, it's enough to flip the entire narrative upside down. Because in the world of curated PR statements and palace polish, Thomas Jr. is the rogue variable, the brother who can't be controlled, who can't be silenced, and who says, flat out, "I know the truth. I've always known. And I'm sick of watching my dad suffer while Meghan plays the victim. Brace yourself." Because this chapter takes the story to places no Netflix documentary ever dared to go. It starts with one sentence. A single line that Thomas Jr. claims Meghan said in a heated phone call, days before her wedding. A line that he says broke their father's heart. "You're an embarrassment." That's it. No pretense. No polite formality. Just a cold, cutting declaration. According to Thomas Jr., Meghan made the call after the infamous paparazzi scandal broke. The one where Thomas Sr. was caught staging photos with photographers, posing while looking at books about the UK, getting fitted for suits, and browsing the internet. Meghan and the palace had been blindsided. And according to Thomas Jr., when Meghan finally got her father on the phone, she exploded. She was furious, Thomas Jr. claims. She told him he'd humiliated her, that she couldn't trust him, that he'd ruined her big day. And then, according to him, came the line that stuck. "You're an embarrassment." Let's pause here, because whether you believe Thomas Jr. or not, this moment matters. If Meghan really did say that, if those words really passed between father and daughter, it reframes everything. It shifts the narrative from estrangement to emotional execution. Because those 3 words carry more than just judgment. They carry finality. They aren't an invitation to repair. They're a lock on a door. And according to Thomas Jr., that was the exact moment everything changed. He says their father was devastated. that he collapsed in his chair after the call, that his blood pressure spiked, that the stress triggered the health crisis that ultimately led him to cancel his appearance at the wedding, and that Meghan never called again. Not when he was hospitalized, not when he underwent surgery, not when he watched her wedding on television, alone, thousands of miles away. After that call, Thomas Jr. says, it was over. For her, it was over. Now here's where the contradictions pile up. Because Meghan has claimed that she wrote her father a heartfelt letter after the wedding, that she wanted closure, that she reached out. But according to Thomas Jr., the call happened before the letter, and that changes everything. Because if the call was filled with anger, rejection, and shame, and the letter was clinical and cold, then the entire arc becomes one long descent. Not an attempt to reconcile, but a strategic method of severing ties. One by one, first with emotion, then with paper, then with silence. Thomas Jr. doesn't hold back. He says the way Meghan treated their father was brutal, that she cut him off like a stranger, that she used fame as a shield and silence as a weapon. He gave her everything, Thomas Jr. says, paid for her school, supported her dream, defended her, and she just erased him. And here's the emotional punch. Even now, after losing a leg, he still asks about her, still wonders if she's okay, still keeps a photo of her on the table next to his bed. Can you imagine that? Being cast out, abandoned, ignored, and still holding on? That's the part of this story that breaks you. Not the headlines, not the lawsuits, not the glitz or the glam, but that raw, quiet pain of a father who still loves a daughter that's no longer there. Now let's talk about why Thomas Jr. is speaking out. Some say he wants attention. Some say he's riding Meghan's fame for clout. But others say something different. That he's simply angry. That he's tired of watching his father deteriorate. That he's watching a man waste away, not just from poor health, but from heartbreak. And that he can't sit back anymore. Because no one else will say it. Because the world keeps ignoring Thomas Sr.'s pain. Because Meghan's silence is being rewritten as strength, and he sees it as cruelty. So he's speaking. And what he's saying, it's shaking people up. He says Meghan always had a sharp tongue. That even before the fame, she had a switch. That 1 minute she'd be sweet, warm, glowing with charm. And the next? Icy, strategic, distant. She knows how to cut people off, he says. She's done it before. She'll do it again. And the scariest part? He says Meghan doesn't regret it. Not a bit. That to her, cutting off their father wasn't a tragedy. It was a decision. Let's go back to that call. If Thomas Jr. is telling the truth, then Meghan's final conversation with her father went something like this. A furious daughter, under public pressure, reeling from headlines. A confused, elderly man, trying to defend himself. And in the middle of that chaos, you're an embarrassment. No apology. No empathy. No curiosity about why he staged the photos. Just a verdict. Cold. Final. And then nothing. No follow-up. No second chance. Just silence. Now, we can't confirm that this call happened exactly as Thomas Jr. describes. Meghan has never addressed it. But the timeline supports it. The phone call, then the letter. The hospitalization, then the wedding. The fallout, then the erasure. And the pattern? It's undeniable. When Meghan wants someone out of her life, she doesn't ghost them. She shuts the door, deadbolts it, then throws away the key. And her father? He's just another one behind the glass. Watching, begging, waiting. And always ignored. But there's more. Because Thomas Jr. says that after the wedding, after the letter, after the lawsuits, he tried to reach out to Meghan himself. Not to beg, not to fight, but to warn her. To tell her that their father's health was failing. That he was slipping into depression. That his body was giving out. That he wasn't going to last much longer. And Meghan? She didn't reply. Not once. Not even with a thank you. Now the stakes are higher than ever. Because Thomas Sr. no longer has time. He's no longer walking. He's no longer strong. He's lost a leg. He's in constant pain. He's confined to hospital beds and rehab centers. And through it all, he's still asking, has she called? Does she know I'm alive? Will I ever meet my grandchildren? And Thomas Jr., watching this unfold, day after day, says he's haunted by one question. What if he dies before she calls? What then? Will there be a statement? A floral arrangement? A quiet donation to a leg amputation charity? Will Meghan speak about forgiveness on a podcast, using carefully prepared words that sidestep the fact that she never called, never visited, never said goodbye? And if she does, will we forgive her? Should we? Because the truth is this. If you believe Thomas Jr., if you believe his version of that final call, that chilling line, that long silence, then Meghan didn't just walk away from her father. She executed a full erasure. And now? Now it may be too late to undo it. Because what comes next is a level of grief no lawsuit can fix. And when Thomas Jr. shares his receipts, photos, emails, messages, it may expose the final, brutal truth about what Meghan knew and what she chose to ignore. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. A royal wedding. A global audience. The fairy tale ending to a modern Cinderella story. But behind the veil, behind the white roses and the gospel choir and the $1,000,000 Givenchy gown, something was quietly falling apart. Not at Windsor Castle, but in a hospital room thousands of miles away. That day, May 19th, 2018, while Meghan Markle was smiling in front of 2 billion people. Her father, Thomas Markle, was lying flat on his back in Mexico, hooked up to heart monitors, recovering from a cardiac procedure, watching his daughter walk down the aisle on a hospital television. No tux, no toast, no father-daughter dance, just a flickering screen and a broken heart. And if you believe his son Thomas Jr., that day didn't just shatter one man. It shattered an entire family. Let's go back to the days leading up to the wedding. The world was in a frenzy. Meghan Markle, the American actress, was marrying Prince Harry. It was historic, symbolic, a cultural flashpoint. But for Thomas Markle, it was pressure. Paparazzi began camping outside his Rosarito home. Cameras followed his every move. One day he was buying beer. The next, looking disheveled. Headlines called him a recluse, a train wreck, a liability. And then, he made a choice. A desperate one. He staged photos. Images of him getting ready for the big day. Reading British history books, being fitted for a suit, looking proud. He said he did it to regain control of the narrative. To look like a dignified father, not a tabloid punchline. But when Meghan found out, everything changed. She called him, allegedly. So did Harry. They told him to stop talking to the press. He promised he would. Then, another set of photos surfaced. And Meghan's trust? Shattered. According to Thomas Jr., it was the beginning of the end. She felt betrayed, he said. But she never gave him a chance to explain. And then, days before the wedding, Thomas Sr. began to experience chest pain. He checked himself into a hospital. Doctors found clogged arteries. They told him he needed a procedure. Immediately, he informed Meghan. He told her he wouldn't be able to attend. And the response? Cold. I hope you can take care of yourself, Meghan allegedly wrote. This is devastating. No, I'm coming. No, let's talk. Just distance. And just like that, he was cut out of the most important day of his daughter's life. Now picture this. You're 73 years old. You've spent your life working long hours in Hollywood, saving money, helping your daughter pursue her dream. You helped her with school, paid for her car, encouraged her acting career. You watched her grow from a child into a star. And then, she's marrying royalty. A global moment. And you're not there. Not because you don't want to be, but because your heart gave out from the pressure. And instead of your daughter rushing to your side, she goes forward without you, smiling, radiant, saying, I do, while the world watches. Without you. Now some say Meghan was caught between impossible choices. A father who embarrassed her. A monarchy demanding perfection. A media circus trying to ruin her wedding. But others say, this was the first real glimpse of how she deals with inconvenience. She doesn't reconcile it. She removes it. And Thomas Markle? He became a problem. And problems don't get invited to royal weddings. Let's look at the optics. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, was front and center. Dignified, graceful, perfectly poised. But Thomas Markle? He was airbrushed out. No photos. No acknowledgement. No chair with his name. And while Meghan walked solo down part of the aisle, Prince Charles stepped in to escort her the rest of the way. A symbolic move. A public declaration. This is your new family now. And just like that, the old family faded into the background. Permanently. Thomas Jr. says their father never recovered emotionally. He sat in that hospital bed, watching her wedding, crying. Not from pride. From pain. He says their father rewatched the ceremony over and over again, trying to understand how it all went so wrong. How he went from proud dad to persona non grata. And then came the letters, then the lawsuits, then the years of silence. But it all started that weekend, with the wedding that left one family united in crowns and another fractured in grief. Here's what's even more heartbreaking. Thomas Markle had prepared a speech. Yes, an actual speech. One he hoped to deliver at the reception. It wasn't formal. It wasn't political. It was just personal. A short tribute to his daughter. How he remembered her as a little girl, playing dress-up in their living room. How she once asked him if real princesses wore jeans. How he knew, long before the rest of the world, that she was destined for something bigger. He never got to read it. Never got to speak. The only people who ever heard that speech were Thomas Jr. and a nurse at the hospital, who sat with him that night as he cried. He handed her the speech and said, "I guess it doesn't matter now. But here's where it turns from tragedy to cold calculation." Because instead of reaching out, Meghan went public. In interviews, she began laying the groundwork for her side of the story. She said she was hurt, that she'd been betrayed, that her father had sold her out. And slowly, but steadily, the image of Thomas Markle shifted. From devoted dad to disgraceful figure. The press followed her lead. Late-night hosts mocked him. Commentators called him toxic. And Meghan? She rose, untouched, untethered, and eerily quiet. But what about the phone calls? The follow-ups? The attempt to repair the damage? They never came. Not on the honeymoon. Not after the Netflix series. Not after Oprah. Not after the birth of Archie. Not after the birth of Lilibet. And now, not even after the leg amputation. According to Thomas Jr., Meghan's silence was so complete, it became a strategy. She erased him, he says, like he never existed. Now we ask, was it self-protection? Or was it something darker? Because the wedding was a moment of global unity. A triumph of modern love. But behind the scenes, it was also a moment of permanent division. And once the crown was placed, Meghan never looked back. No reconciliation. No reflection. Just reinvention. And the Markle name? A problem to be handled. Erased. Blocked. Replaced. And yet, 5 years later, Thomas Sr. still keeps the invitation. Framed. On his bedside table. He never threw it away. Not even after the leg was removed. Not even after the silence dragged on for years. He still believes, somehow, that Meghan might call. Might visit. Might bring Archie and Lilibet for a miracle reunion. But time is running out. And hope, as they say, is not a strategy. In the next chapter, we follow the money. Because Meghan said she left the royal family to protect her peace. But when it came to Thomas Markle, the fight wasn't peaceful. It was personal. And when the question of money entered the equation, everything got worse. What came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Did Meghan ever help her father financially? Or did she cut him off completely? This is the question no one wants to touch. The awkward elephant in the room. Because beneath all the talk of trauma, boundaries, and betrayal, there's a far less glamorous thread running through the Markle saga. Money. And in this family, it's not just a topic. It's a battlefield. Thomas Markle gave Meghan everything he had. Literally. He cashed out his savings. Took on credit card debt. Delayed his own retirement. Also, she could live her dream. Acting school. Private education. A used car. Rent in Los Angeles. Headshots. Auditions. He did it all. And yet, today, he sits in a wheelchair, legless, broke, and completely alone. And Meghan? She's worth millions. The Netflix deal. The Spotify podcast. The Archwell brand. The fashion collaborations. The speaking gigs. The book deals. The content empire. She lives in a Montecito mansion. She flies private. She wears Cartier and Dior. And Thomas Markle? He lives in a modest seaside house in Rosarito, Mexico, with peeling paint and secondhand furniture. So we ask again, did Meghan ever offer financial help? Or did she slam the door shut? Let's start with what we do know. During her early acting career, Meghan repeatedly credited her father for helping her. She even wrote a now infamous Father's Day tribute in 2016, saying, "You taught me to be kind. You taught me to work hard. You believed in me." She told interviewers he funded her education at Immaculate Heart High School and Northwestern University, that he supported her when no one else did. And all of that is true. Thomas Markle paid for Meghan's schooling. He even helped her land early gigs in the entertainment industry by teaching her about cameras and lighting. But as soon as she started climbing the ladder of fame, that gratitude turned into distance. And when the royal relationship began, the silence became permanent. Let's be brutally honest. Thomas Markle is not a wealthy man. He's an aging retiree living off Social Security and dwindling pensions. After working for decades in the television industry, winning daytime Emmys, building a decent career, he walked away with little. No Hollywood residuals. No producer-level royalties. Just enough to survive. And then came the medical bills. The stroke. The heart surgery. And now, amputation. These aren't minor expenses. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars in hospital care, medication, physical therapy, and home modifications. And through it all, Meghan, his only daughter, hasn't offered to cover a dime. At least, not publicly. No legal filings. No donations. No PR gestures. No rumors. No leaks. Nothing. Not even a whisper. But the silence doesn't end there. In fact, according to Thomas Jr., there was a moment, right before Meghan's wedding, where the question of money caused an even deeper rupture. He says their father had just gone through a financial rough patch. Medical debt, mortgage stress, car issues. And he reached out, not for a handout, but for help. Just enough to clear a few bills. Maybe pay off a hospital fee. According to Thomas Jr., Meghan refused. Flat out. No explanation. No counteroffer. Just no. Now contrast that with what Meghan has spent since. Her wedding dress alone cost an estimated $265,000. The Montecito estate? Over $14 million. Renovations? Security? Travel? Millions more. And still, not a single hospital bill paid for the man who once drove her to auditions in a beat-up Volvo. Is that justice? Is that boundaries? Or is that vengeance? Meghan has spoken often about the financial entrapment of royal life. She said she was cut off by the institution, that she had to rely on Harry's inheritance from Princess Diana, that they needed to make their own money. And they did, spectacularly. But what about helping the man who gave her a financial lifeline? That question remains unanswered. And Thomas Jr. says it's not just about bills. It's about dignity. My dad wasn't asking to be kept. He just needed a little help. A safety net. A sign she still cared. But she shut him out completely. And the emotional cost? Even higher than the financial one. Let's look at another contradiction. When Meghan and Harry signed their Netflix deal, worth a reported $100 million. They claimed the money would be used to build content that inspired and uplifted. Documentaries, children's programming, social justice projects. But what about family? What about healing? What about using that wealth to bridge the gap between past and present? Because Thomas Markle doesn't need a Netflix subscription. He needs a wheelchair-accessible bathroom. He needs a ramp installed in his home. He needs medication, nurses, transportation. And his daughter? She's building an empire about wellness and self-care, while her own father can't walk. And the ultimate irony? Thomas Sr. never asked for public reimbursement. He never demanded a settlement. He never dragged Meghan to court. All he ever wanted was a relationship. The money? That came second. The connection? That was the priority. But now, with one leg gone and medical bills piling up, he's running out of options. And the world is watching. Thomas Jr. says it plainly. She has the means to help him. She just doesn't want to. And if that's true, we're looking at something darker than neglect. We're looking at deliberate punishment, the withdrawal of affection, the withholding of support, not because of boundaries, but because of power. And Meghan? She holds all of it. Now let's be fair. We don't know what conversations may have happened privately. We don't know if Meghan offered behind closed doors and was refused. We don't know what legal entanglements exist. But what we do know is that Thomas Markle remains on his own. Physically, emotionally, financially, and he's never shied away from saying it. I'm not asking for a check, he told reporters. I'm asking for a connection. But so far, he's gotten neither. Not from Meghan, not from Harry, not from the institution that elevated her to global stardom. And the longer the silence stretches, the more it feels like a final verdict. In the next chapter, we follow that money trail even further. Because Thomas Jr. says Meghan did offer something to their father once. But it came with a price. It came with a non-disclosure agreement. And if that's true, then this isn't just about estrangement. It's about a silencing campaign. A paper wall between a father and daughter. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the